Hi, guys and gals. I'm John, and I've spent almost all my conscious life in absolute darkness. Doctors made me able to see only 6 months ago. And now I am ready to confess. It would be better if I remained blind forever. My parents told me that for the first several months of my life, they did not even realize that I could not see. I behaved just like any normal baby. Stared at anything that grabbed my attention, cried, and eagerly shook the baby rattle before falling asleep. Mom and Dad began to suspect that something was wrong only when I started learning to walk. After several of my unlucky collisions with stools, chairs, and tables that ended with bumps and bruises, my parents took me to a doctor. There, he told them that I was as blind as a bat. Funny thing is, the doctors could not even explain to Mom and Dad why my eyes refused to work as they should. The medics drew their eyebrows together, frowned, shook their heads, gave my parents some lengthy lectures with dozens of complex terms in Latin, but weren't able to give any adequate explanation. In time, my parents realized that my eyes were fine. The problem was with my brain. Some of the important connections there have never formed. Therefore, the doctors agreed that I had zero chance to become sighted in the future. Mom and Dad had to accept the fact that their son will never be able to see their faces. Raising a blind child was a difficult trial for my parents. I was too small to understand why my mother often cried in her room at night. She must have gone there to cry so as not to embarrass me with her tears. Unfortunately, the parents did not take into account that the blind have better hearing than the sighted. We use other senses to compensate for the lack of eyes, and they always become much sharper as a result. My hearing was super good, so I hear my mother's crying very clearly. I also heard that Dad have always comforted her. And when Dad himself was on the verge of surrendering, Mom always came to help him. Long ago, when I initially realized that my parents were crying because of me, I felt very upset and offended. I even wanted to come to Mom and Dad and proudly ask him to take me to the orphanage. There, I figured, they would be able to get another child that won't upset them. At the time, I was just a small, resentful child. Fortunately, I've never done so. I quickly realized that our life has already been hard for Mom and Dad, and my folly would only upset them even more. At the same time, I'd like to acknowledge everything my parents did for me. Neither my mom nor dad showed me that I was any worse than my peers. I am sincerely grateful to my father and mother. Without the education they gave me, I would hardly achieve anything through life. Their support was invaluable. Until recently. I successfully graduated from high school and even entered a good college, all due to the support from Mom and Dad. They found specialists who taught me how to read Braille. Of course, I had to study in a special school, But my school years were top-notch. But the music club where I learned how to play guitar was just a normal club. I studied there side by side with normal children. And somehow, I had better grades than most of my healthy peers. Until recently, I did consider myself ill or special. I had good friends, a loyal and loving girlfriend, an excellent hobby, and serious goal for the future. You see, I was really hoping to become a perfumer. Of course, I always needed help with mixing the solutions. But the smells that I made were amazing. My concoctions surprised even the adult specialists. If there was such a thing as innate talent, then I was simply born to become a perfumer. I've already mentioned earlier that due to a lack of vision, all my other senses were extremely aggravated. It turned out that becoming a perfumer was much easier when your nose feels a gamut of odors completely inaccessible to all of your sighted classmates. Unfortunately, I've still got some difficulties to handle. Due to allergies, I could not get a guide dog. I travel confidently among familiar routes, but I could not get into unfamiliar places without a friend or relative to guide me. Otherwise than that, however, I had zero problems. I guess it would have been much worse if I had initially been a sighted child and became blind later. But I was blind from birth and could not even imagine how sighted people perceive the world. I lived in a dark but comfortable world of my own, full of sounds, smells, and touches. And I was comfortable in that world of mine. Of course, Mom and Dad have constantly been telling me that sooner or later I would be able to see. I was waiting for this moment. and even hoped that they were right. But I had no idea what it was like to see anything. Well, I guess you wouldn't be able to understand me. For someone who has been blind since birth, promises of being able to see sound just like promises of a personal meeting with Santa. The older you become, the less you believe in it. But in my case, the promises of Dad and Mom transcended into reality. Sadly, now I'm not at all sure that this turned out to be for the best. I've gained sight in a rather unusual way. A thriving medical corporation was testing a new way of healing the brain that had something to do with nerves. I won't tell you the details. When it came to them, the doctors were unable to describe their own action in a way that I could understand. They promised me that in a case of success, I'd become sighted. And the most interesting thing was that I would not have to pay a penny for this. Dad and Mom were very wary when they heard, but corporate representatives quickly reassured my parents. Moreover, they promised to pay me a tidy sum for what was essentially a test of the company's newest product. I had nothing to lose, so we quickly agreed to the proposal of the doctors. Good news arrived almost immediately. During the initial checkup, the doctors noticed that the connections in my brain improved due to the changes that came with adolescence. So a chance of their new method's success increased to almost 100%. Parents were thrilled. Their greatest dream was finally going to be fulfilled. But I still wondered how sight could affect my life. I spent 2.5 months in the hospital room, having left it only to get another operation or two. That time was painful and scary, but thanks to my parents, I still held faith in the doctors. Mom and Dad convinced me that as soon as I would be able to see, I would immediately understand what I'd been missing for all these years. Unfortunately, the result was exactly the opposite. When my vision returned, I was horrified. The chaotic, noisy, and strange world I found myself in was wildly uncomfortable. People around me were vastly different from what I imagined them to be for my entire life. The comfortable universe of mine was shattered into pieces, and putting it together again turned out to be very difficult. I've spent 2 whole months assembling my own life back again, brick by brick, gradually getting used to the new world around me. For the first 3 weeks after becoming sighted, I hardly even slept. I found it immensely scary to lose my vigilance in this eerie, colorful universe for even a single moment, not to mention the whole long night. Insomnia, multiple nervous breakdowns, panic attacks, and immense misunderstanding of what was happening around me. Those first months were horrible, to say the least. And the worst thing was that I had to cope with all of it alone. First of all, I tried to get support from Mom and Dad, but they just refused to understand my problems. Moreover, they accused me of trying to nullify all their efforts. I think they despise me now. My parents somehow thought that I've just become a drama queen out of nowhere. By the way, doctors say that in situations like mine, help of an experienced psychologist is vitally important. Unfortunately, Mom and Dad were sure that I was actually able to cope with all the problems myself, and even that I came up with most of the difficulties. Dad once told Mom, "That kid's just used to being an attention hog," and Mom nodded in agreement. And my friends, I've soon discovered that they weren't true to me. In a few weeks, I realized that my girlfriend, whom I'd been dating for 2 years, was cheating on me with my best friend right behind my back. Those two tried to hide their relationship when they realized that I really became sighted. But once I caught them in the act, naturally, I immediately broke up with her. All of my pals were not much better. For each of them, I was either a source of some advantages or a way to feel like a virtuous angel, but not a living, breathing friend who needed help and support. So it turned out that I had to cope with this whole world of noise and colors alone. And frankly speaking, I fared not that well. My performance at school has fallen by an order of magnitude. And now my parents constantly scold me because of it. Every day they accuse me of being an ungrateful swine. They've sacrificed everything for the sake of my sight, and now it turned out to be a bitter disappointment. And I have nothing to answer them. Try telling Dad and Mom that all their efforts were in vain, and it would be much better for me to stay blind. In fact, my problems at school, sleep disorders, and nervous breakdowns come from one source. You see, I found myself in a completely new world. And this world causes me to stay constantly on guard. It is very difficult to cope with such stress without any support. Even the changes of my reaction rate come from the very same source. I was used to navigating the world with zero vision, and now my vision only bothers me instead of helping. It forces me to check and double check the same things again and again and again. Oh, how I wish to return to that comfortable darkness. Even my dreams of becoming a perfumer were ruined. Due to the newfound vision, it was no longer possible for me to concentrate on the smell as I had been before. Now I can't even replicate the concoctions I've been making before, let alone make some new ones. My life was far more easier when I've been blind. Now I find myself in a strange and frightening world where my friends and family turned out to be either traitors or egoists. Oh, how I'd like to go back in time and dissuade Mom and Dad from the operation by any means. Alas, this is impossible, and I still do not understand how should I live now.
Hi, I'm Mark, and I am a dead man. I'm joking, of course, but once I had a creepy adventure that'd make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. My own parents buried me alive. You see, they thought I was dead. Curious? Give me a minute and I'll tell you more about that accident. When I was 14, I had an accident. I ran into a car on my scooter. Good thing I wasn't going fast. When the scooter and the car collided, I fell to the ground and hit my head. The car driver immediately ran up to me and asked whether I was all right. Apparently, I didn't feel any pain because of the shock, so I gave a coherent response and told him that I didn't need to go to the hospital. I only asked him to drive me home because my scooter broke. The man agreed. I got in the back seat of his car and passed out. 30 minutes later, he woke me up. I opened my eyes and saw that the car was staying just near my house's courtyard. The man got my scooter out of the trunk of the car, gave me $5,000, and drove off. I never saw him again. I calmly went home, smiled at my mom, and even kissed her on the cheek. She asked if everything was all right because I looked pale and tired. I answered that I was okay and just wanted to lie down a bit because the weather was too hot. Mom answered with a smile, told me that dinner would be ready in a couple of hours, and went back to watching another episode of her favorite series. I went upstairs to my room, laid down on the bed, and woke up in a coffin exactly 1 year later. I can only describe what happened next according to my mom, who has been caring for me during that whole year. Mom actually handed off all the household chores and work-related stuff affairs on Dad and my older sister, and she herself stayed at the hospital to be near me at all times. It turned out that on the day when I had an accident, Mom and Dad had a quarrel. They refused to talk to each other until the late evening, and my mother completely forgot about dinner. Therefore, she had no need to call me for it. They reconciled only the next morning, and in the morning, Mom went to my room to wake me up for school. So, Mom came to my room as usual at 7:30. She spent 15 minutes or so knocking at my door, then came in and saw me sleeping in the same attire I had worn the day before. At that moment, Mom still didn't suspect anything unusual, so she tried to wake me up. After 5 minutes of futile attempts, she asked Dad for help, but he couldn't wake me up as well. Only then, Mom started to panic. Dad called an ambulance and they hospitalized me. The doctors put me on several life support devices. My parents were told that I slipped into a coma. I guess the coma was caused by a concussion that I received as a result of the accident. But no one knew about the accident. Mom and Dad could not understand the reasons of my coma. Mom spent days and nights by my bed. Sometimes my sister took her place to give Mom some rest. But more often than not, Mom still stayed nearby, crying and telling me various stories. I kind of heard them while in a coma, and they gave me beautiful dreams. For example, Mom told me about our family's journey to the seaside. I was still a kid at the time of that journey. At the seaside, there was a beach shrouded in a thick fog at all times. The fog was so dense that it turned out to be impossible to discern anything in it. Mom told me that I used to hide in the fog and kept silent while my parents were screaming at the top of their lungs trying to find me. She just kept telling me stories, crying all the time. I remember that because I actually felt her tears on my hands. Sometimes Dad came to visit me. I even vaguely remember his words. He was always telling me something about recklessness and unnecessary courage. He told me that Mom was at her limit and that I need to return, to come back. But what could I answer? I was in another world altogether. You see, sometimes I was able to watch the events in my ward from outside. No, I wasn't flying near the ceiling as a disembodied soul or something. I really lived in a different world. That small world had a house that I remembered from my childhood, at the time I had been inhabited by my grandparents. But in my small world, there was no one in the house but me. There were lots of strawberries and raspberries nearby, so I never felt hungry. There was a stream, so I often swam there. And once I even went further and found the seashore shrouded with a thick fog, just like my mother told me. And I even hid there, just like when I was a child, only now there was no one to look for me. I spent the whole year living in that small world, but in reality, my unconscious body was just lying on a hospital bed. Mom cried over it. Dad sometimes verbally lashed at it, and I rarely could hear my sisters snoring from beyond the veil, so to say. Frankly speaking, that state of affairs felt strangely comforting. They fed me, cared for me, and even cried over my body. However, the whole situation was incredibly stressful for my parents. Mom was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She lost weight and looked peaky. Dad threw himself into work. He spent all his time in an office and only rarely came home. And my sister just moved away, leaving the parents alone with each other and the comatose son. My future was vague and uncertain. My attending physician even told my parents that there was no positive dynamics. According to his words, I had brain damage and turned into a vegetable. Therefore, he advised Mom and Dad to take me off life support and bury me in peace. If I was able to hear his words from my little world, I definitely woke up with laughter. Dad accepted that offer rather quickly. I suppose he was extremely tired of Mom's depression and most probably already got a girlfriend on the side. Mom, on the other hand, fought a valiant battle, and I'm really thankful for that. However, in a few days, she gave up. Dad and doctor had finally prevailed. They unplugged me. That's where the next step of my story began. Mom told me that my funeral ceremony was magnificent. The parents invited all of my friends. Mom cooked a lot of delicious food, including my favorite muffins. I know it sounds weird, but apparently all the guests were satisfied, and everything went well. I was put in a spacious black lacquered coffin with an opening lid. That way all the guests could come up and say goodbye to me. Even Dora, the girl who I really liked, came to my funeral and extended a few words of farewell. It would have been an exemplary funeral, except the fact that I was actually alive for all that time. Of course, the funeral ended when they buried me, but that's obviously not the end of my story. After all, otherwise I couldn't be able to tell you it. That was the most horrible awakening in my life. I woke up in complete darkness. I felt the smell of fresh wood and earth, and it was a bit damp. At first, I did not understand where I was. For a few seconds or so, I even thought it was a hoax of some kind. I couldn't understand why I wasn't able to move and why it was so dark. And then, I remembered the priest's eulogy dedicated to me. I was horrified. I finally realized that everyone thought I was dead. In a minute or so, I figured out that I was in a coffin. I was buried alive. I really didn't want to end up like this, dying of suffocation in my own coffin. Good thing that I'm a brave guy. I don't give up so easy. So I started to think about any escape routes. At first, I tried to break the coffin lid with my bare hands. A stupid undertaking, to be sure. If you ever end up like me, never do that. You see, I was deep underground, and even if I broke the coffin, I'd just be buried under all that soil. So I managed to calm down and started calling for help. I knew that often undertakers sometimes patrol the cemeteries, and I hoped that I would end up lucky and they would hear me. I continued to call for help for some time. I felt like I've been doing so for hours. Guess I really spent only several minutes or so. Underground, you don't have much air, and I even stopped pounding on the coffin lid. My hands felt incredibly heavy. Finally, I heard the sound of a shovel striking the lid of the coffin. I gathered all my remaining energy and started screaming even louder. That's when I heard a voice from the outside. Some unfamiliar man told me that he was already in the process of digging me out, and that I should probably save my strength. And finally, someone opened my coffin. The moon shone brightly in my eyes, and I saw a truly hideous face that probably belonged to an undertaker. I took a deep breath and fainted. When I woke up, I was at the hospital yet again. My mother was standing near my bed, tears running down her cheeks. There was also my sister in the room, sitting in a chair in front of my bed. Dad was absent. Mom later told me that they divorced while I was comatose. A lot of things happened during the year I spent in another world. Initially, Mom tried to hug me, but the doctor who entered the ward stopped her. He told her that I was still weak and needed peace and quiet. In a couple of days, I was released from the hospital. Now, there are 3 of us in the house, my mom, my sister, and me. Dad doesn't live with us anymore. I was right. He found another woman and moved to her. Mom still thinks that it was her fault. And I think that actually it is my fault. What's your opinion, dear subscriber? Of course, I am sometimes seeing Dad. From time to time, we even go watch football together. He still tries to give me life lessons, but I rarely listen to him anymore. I really believe that you can't learn anything from a man who abandoned his family in a difficult situation and even decided to unplug his son from the life support devices. This story taught me an important lesson. You always need to think about where and how you are going in your life. And try not to indulge in dreams too much. Dreams are dreams, but life goes on, and you gotta catch up to it.
Hi, I'm Amy, and I recently became disabled, all because of my brother, who is an idiot. That fool put me in danger, and now I ended up in a wheelchair all because of him. My brother is my curse. He's 3 years younger than me, but sometimes I think of him as a stupid toddler. I've always been a leader among my peers and a driving force in our company of kids. But Michael always did everything to disgrace me. He did not know how to climb trees, did not want to play soldiers with us, and even refused to portray a wounded warrior when I asked him to. Mom said that I needed to be a little bit nicer with him, but his antics made me the laughingstock of our company. They said I wasn't cut to be a leader when my brother was such a pushover. Can you even imagine how insulting it was? The day when I became disabled started as usual. My parents sent us to play with other kids and told us not to return until the very evening. Our neighborhood community had a special meeting or something like that. It was kind of important, and all the residents of 3 neighboring streets had to be present. Therefore, our company of kids grew to gigantic proportions. Sad thing was that the nearby clearing, the best location for our game of tag, was closed due to some pipe repairs. Once, I even overheard my mom's bitter words about the only place suitable for our games in the whole neighborhood got closed for good. And now we kids had almost nowhere to play. Of course, we kids had some other places to play that the adults knew nothing about. We even had our own network of tunnels, so as to move around without making a fuss. However, Mom was somehow right. The clearing really appeared to be the only legal children's playground in our area. There were even 3 sports training devices and a small football field with goalposts. All that stuff was supposed to motivate us for sports, you know? So our parents sent us to the clearing as usual. Their important meeting was more like a small barbecue festival. But oh well, we had to obey our moms and dads. They were all in the streets and we kids couldn't use our tunnels or go to our secret playgrounds. Yet, our clearing was all but destroyed. Guess my mom was right. Now our old playground was really gone for good. Now there are only huge piles of dirt, lots of demolition waste, and some old pipes. Well, there also was a trench, 2.5 feet wide, but very deep, full of steel rods, pipe parts, broken bricks, and similar stuff. You see, we were bored out of our minds, and there really was nothing to do. So we decided to test our strength, so to say, and went to the trench. Everything was fenced there, of course, but the safety lines meant nothing to us, all things considered. It was really kind of stupid. Well, many kids ran away at that point, afraid of playing on a construction site. Yet the boys and girls I always considered my team followed me. And of course, Michael stayed as well. Well, not really his own volition, to be true. That little brat peed his pants in fear and tried to run away. At other times, I'd let him run away, but kids from my team laughed at me. So I grabbed his hand and dragged him there. I needed to jump that trench. I needed to prove to my friends that me and my brother weren't cowards. So I dropped Michael somewhere near the trench, took a running start, and you see, I made a number of similar jumps earlier in my life, and I was always successful. But this time, I felt Michael pushing me just near the trench. Because of that, I slipped and wasn't able to do a good jump. My leap was a failure. I actually reached the other side of the trench, but I wasn't able to hold on there because of dirt and a bad jump, and fell backwards right into the trench, full of steel rods, pipe parts, and broken bricks. And the pipes there were red hot. Since then, my life turned into hell. I don't remember much. The shock saved me from the most horrible memories. I just remember the pipes radiating scalding heat and the smell of something burning. Later it turned out that those were my legs. So, yeah, the jump ended up in a nightmare. Guess I was quite lucky that the adults were nearby, and the other kids immediately called for help. Still, I wasn't that lucky. Now my whole world is limited to a wheelchair. Yep, I've got no legs now. I'm a disabled person who can't move on her own, or reach up high shelves anymore. I can't even use the bathroom. There's a bedpan installed into my wheelchair, and that's humiliating to the extreme. Of course, my parents told me that it could have been worse. Can't really imagine how, though. I really hope to get some prosthetics one day, but those are very expensive, and my family can't afford them, and our insurance is no help. They say that I myself am to blame of my injuries. They have a bunch of witnesses of me jumping into that trench all by myself. Even the workers didn't suffer any punishment, because there were safety lines after all. No one really believes me, but I know that Michael cursed me to such a miserable existence. I clearly remember that push even now. I know that it was Michael who pushed me down the trench, and I hate him so much because of it. Now he's trying hard to look like a good, caring brother. He's always around and he tells me that he wants to help. That monster. No one believes me, but I hope that Michael would receive his fair share of punishment one day. I hope he'll suffer as much as I suffer now. This hope is the only thing that gives me strength to live now.
Hi everyone, I'm Michael, Amy's brother. My beloved sister has always lived in never my fault mode. And this case is not the exception. By all means, I'm not the bravest man in the world, and my sister, on the other hand, is brash, overactive, and fearless. Guess the person responsible for the distribution of tempers up there, in heaven, made a mistake. If my sister and I exchanged bodies, we would have been perfect kids. Yet, here we are. Overactive, vigorous, loud Amy, and me, quiet and homely. I even slept with the lights on till I was 14. My sister was always fearless and enjoyed activities of any kind. I, on the other hand, really loved reading and never was a huge fan of outdoor activities. My parents tried hard to give each of us something to do. They enlisted Amy into a number of hobby courses, put her in fighting classes, and even took her to the doctor. You see, my sister was hyperactive and not in a particularly funny way, and for some reason, she really liked messing with me. Honestly, I have no idea why she needed that. Apparently, she believed that I was to blame for all her problems. According to Amy, I was the reason the boys laughed at her, and she got bad marks only because of me. Don't ask. I don't see any kind of connection either. It seemed to me that if suddenly the world began to crumble, she'd declare me the culprit. Our therapist said it was her way of expressing jealousness. Obviously, that didn't make me feel any better about my sister. So many times she humiliated me in front of the others. To be honest, any other boy would already show his sister who's the boss. I, on the other hand, tried to ignore her. I didn't care about any of her accusations. I just wanted to be left alone. Funny thing is, she always fancied herself as a leader. Despite that, the majority of kids considered her a sadist and a psychopath. They also pitied me. As for me, I always tried to keep my distance, both from my sister and those trying to pity me. I wanted to be left alone, and that's it. The accident at the clearing was horrible. To be fair, I always thought that the clearing should have been closed for good. There was nothing nice at the clearing, only rusty sport equipment, fences, and gates. And of course, it was Amy's friend's favorite place. My sister and the thugs that kept her company really enjoyed hanging out there. If I had my way, I'd never go there in the first place. You see, I've never been a sports guy. At the time of the accident, I was even extra clumsy. I could easily trip over my own leg and fall flat, and Amy wanted me to jump over an almost 3 feet wide trench that was also incredibly deep. I even told her that I had no intentions of breaking my neck. I really wanted to go home, maybe climb an apple tree in our backyard, maybe read some book in a hammock. I didn't want to play in dirt and jump over some dangerous trenches. Yet Amy had other plans. When she grabbed my hand, I immediately realized the danger. Yep, I wasn't a sports guy, but I was a fully developed 12-year-old boy, and I was too heavy for her to throw over the trench or whatever she wanted to do with me. Besides, I knew that I won't be able to jump over the trench by myself. I tried to break out, to escape, to hinder her, but she was really determined to ditch us both. I finally managed to wrench my hand out of hers right before she jumped, and still, both of us fell into the goddamn trench. And about that push, the pipe would have split Amy's head open if not for my push. So yeah, I fell into the trench as well. I got a bit luckier, though. Got away with some burns and a broken hand. And Amy at least stayed alive, so there's that. But now, she tries to blame me. Both of us suffered because of her. We'd both be alive and healthy, but no, she had to prove our bravery. And even now, she's sure that she was right, and I am to blame. Yeah, blame your younger brother. It'd definitely help you. Hello everyone, I'm David, and I've got a pretty shameful story. You see, I'm a patriot, and once decided to go and pay back my debt to the homeland. Unfortunately, it turned out that the majority of youngsters bound to military service over the past few years have been girls. Don't get me wrong, I never had anything against the Army. Actually, I wanted to become a soldier since my childhood. I dreamed about serving in the Army, clad in a beautiful uniform and protecting the innocent. You see, my dad served in the Army, so I really wished to follow in his footsteps and to become a part of our own military dynasty, so to speak. Unfortunately, the reality turned out to be far from what Dad once told me. Well, let me tell this in order, otherwise my story will turn into a real mess. As I've already mentioned, I've wanted to be like my dad since childhood. I wanted to be a strong, brave man with square jaw and lots of impressive scars. Dad was my superhero, and no Iron Man or Hulk could stand up to him. I always agreed to clean the house or mow the lawn so that my dad won't get tired and could tell me more of his war stories. Dad often remembered the war. He told me how they dragged their wounded from the battlefield with artillery shells exploding all around and bullets flying over their heads. With his stories and my vivid imagination, I needed neither films nor computer games. I was determined to become a soldier when I grow up, and then, why the hell not? Maybe I can get promoted to the officer rank. So I was gearing myself for this future since the time I was 12. Then I engaged in professional sports. A good soldier is the one that fights well. Can't say it was a total failure, but it certainly wasn't a success. They've praised me and even promised that in some time I'd be able to submit an application to MMA. But until I was 17, even the kids regularly brought me down. I wasn't that good at shooting either. 9 out of my 10 shots always missed the target, and the one that hit was still far away from its center. Besides, my eyesight faded furthermore with age, so, as you see, I had no chances to pursue a sniper career. The only thing I was really good at was general athletics, running, squats, push-ups. I could also quickly climb walls. I was tall and lanky enough for it. I still don't understand whom I inherited my appearance from. My mom is beautiful beyond belief and has a great figure. Even now, she's still turning men's heads with a single glance. Dad is a burly, athletic, 6-foot-tall man. Nowadays he drinks a lot, but he's still able to fold a coin with 2 fingers or a steel pipe with only 1 hand. And I'm just an awkward teenager. I've practiced sports for years, but despite that, I was never able to gain some muscle or even become a bit fatter. I even tried different diets to somehow gain more body mass, but nothing really happened. You know, if I were a girl, that sort of body would be perfect, the ideal model figure and a rapid metabolism to boot. But I'm a guy, and our standards of handsomeness are completely different. Well, I was really trying so hard to become a real sportsman. I ate according to the schedule and performed a whole complex of exercises each day, so that I might look much more different by the time of my graduation. It kind of worked out, actually. At least now, I no more resembled a living skeleton. And then the exam day came. More precisely, my classmates had their exams, and I had to pass the medical and meet a couple of athletic standards in order to become a soldier. I was so nervous during the months prior to the exam day that when the day itself came, things grew a bit dull. For some reason, I was alone on the obstacle course. No, there were some people nearby taking notes and all, so I thought that the examiners just needed to figure out physical capacities of each soldier individually. Later, it turned out that that was not the case, however. As a result, when all the tests and screenings were over, I was offered a contract in the Air Force. I was going to become a war pilot. Actually, this was considered a rather prestigious job, but they made it look as if I was just not suitable for any other role. I even felt a bit hurt at first. Well, that wasn't really important for me. After all, my greatest dream did come true. I got into the Army. I was going to become a real soldier after all these years. So on the first day, I actually felt ecstatic. I was still very happy while I filled out all the necessary documents and signed all the papers and such. But then, everything changed. Just imagine the situation. I went right into my barrack, threw my backpack on the bed, raised my head, and saw a bunch of girls. Every other bunk was occupied by a female soldier, and all of them were looking at me with curiosity. Each of them looked like a beautiful Valkyrie. They were from 17 to 25 years old, and I appeared to be the only guy around. For someone else, it'd be a heaven on earth, but for me it certainly looked like another ordeal. It turned out that the last military conscription kinda collapsed. In general, girls in our country have been much more willing to join the Army as of late, and during the recent year, I was the only new guy to be assigned to the Air Force. Our platoon had only 2 males, me and the sergeant, but he was the authority, and well, it really wasn't looking good. At first, the sergeant kinda supervised me. He even relocated me to a bunk in the closet because girls refused to live in the same barrack with a guy. The opening week wasn't really that bad, and then the practice time came. If you thought that pilots had only flying practice, then you were horribly mistaken. The general training and standards are approximately the same for any troopers, and you have to meet the standards regardless of your area of expertise. Yes, we pilots have our flight training. Those in the Navy work with ships, and the infantry learns much more of shooting and fighting, but the basics remain the same for all of us. Still, forced marches are included in the basics, and my very first forced march in the Army was a complete disgrace to me. Before that, I thought that I could manage that with ease, and that all the girls would lose to me. In reality, those Valkyries had much more stamina and strength than me. I was physically unable to continue the march on the 3rd lap, and 2 young ladies literally dragged me by the arms, while all the other girls outran us. In the end, I was laying on the ground, howling from pain and shame, and all the girls all looked as if they had just left a beauty salon. The exact same thing happened to me later during all the challenges. Not only I was unable to beat them in a race, my results dragged all the platoon down as I came out last in every challenge. It was a complete failure. The girls were openly mocking me. At some point, even the sergeant couldn't stand it and berated me. My results were horrible, and the situation looked utterly hopeless. Each day I was crying at night for the first time in my life. I've never allowed myself to cry, not even in the earliest childhood, but now I simply could not restrain myself. It seemed to me that I was not just loser, but the rightful king of all losers, useless to anyone and despised by all. It felt horrible. I wouldn't want even my worst enemy to experience this. But in half a year, the situation began to change. Firstly, I appeared to be a really talented pilot, and secondly, my results during forced marches and the like suddenly were all rendered unimportant. You see, I was still the only guy in the whole platoon. The sergeant was old, nasty, and married, and the girls were too young to deprive themselves of all instincts with hard training. And at some point, these very instincts pointed them to the only person who could help. Firstly, the toughest girl of the squad suddenly approached me and promised to kick me from the start of the obstacle course to its finish and back again. To be honest, I got very scared. You see, she was just too tough for me, and I didn't realize that it was her way of flirting. But then all the girls, even those who had insulted me earlier, began to approach me in secret and make dirty proposals. I understood everything. Well, I certainly didn't act like a gentleman or even like a soldier, because I was unable to stop myself. It was pretty funny to watch how the girls who had despised me just a couple of months ago were now actively courting me, ready to fight for my attention. Of course, I understood that it was wrong, but I really wanted to avenge the humiliation. In order to win my favor, the girls began attacking each other. Some even resorted to theft and sabotage. They've been trying everything to frame their rivals and knock them out of the game for some time. The sergeant found himself in the eye of the storm. He was still trying to maintain order, but he was alone and there were so many girls. As soon as I showed even the slightest hints of favor towards one girl, she immediately became the target of attacks by the others. Once or twice, the girls even ambushed one of my favorites en masse. Good thing that later I got tired of taking revenge. Now I just wanted some simple human joys. I wasn't even talking about intimacy and such. I just wanted hugs, small talk, holding hands, and so on. For these purposes, I chose two of the cutest and most modest girls. Yeah, two at once. I invited each of them to date in secret so that the rest would not know about it and the girls would have no problems. Of course, I had a separate talk with each so that they would not know about each other. You can't even imagine how difficult it was to arrange secret dates in the army where there are naturally few places to hide. Good thing we sometimes had joint night shifts. There in the darkness behind the tents and outposts, there was enough space for two of us. Soon, I stopped being the most miserable person in the world and became the happiest one instead. Unfortunately, I kind of forgot about my original goal, to serve the homeland. Some may want to judge me for what I did, but I liked it and really hoped that it would continue like this. Still, all good things come to an end sooner or later. Fortunately for me, my training ended before all my dirty secrets went out. I was transferred to another place so that I could stay closer to the plains, and the girls were left behind. In a few weeks, those Valkyries somehow managed to crack my secrets and found out about everything. At the time, I was forced to block the phone because they all started calling me with threats. Well, guess I deserved it.
Hi all, I'm Angela, and I've got a rather commonplace problem. A lot of people suffer like I did, but that doesn't make the situation better. After all, it always feels bad when your parents love your younger siblings more. Once, I was the beloved child in the family. We've got a lot of relatives, you see. A lot of cousins, uncles, aunts, grandpas, and grandmas who are always around. Yet, I've always separated my nearest circle from all the other family members. My circle consisted of only Mom and Dad. They loved me, sang me lullabies, and tended to my scratched knees. I knew that they'd always be with me and care about me, but I never made use of their love, I swear. You see, I am not a capricious child. I honestly believe that if you are treated well, you should correspond. If your parents trust you, you mustn't betray their trust. You must always gift them something in return, as it should be. I studied well, as if I actually have some reputation to uphold. I rarely even received something less than an A. The only two exceptions to the rule were PE and math. I was never really good at PE, and our math teacher just plain didn't like me. Tell me, how the absence of a full stop at the end of a sentence could ever matter in math? I was always sure that in math, numbers mattered, not the punctuation marks. Still, Mom and Dad never scolded me for this. They even went to school and had a talk with my math teacher to understand the situation better. Everything was great until I got a brother. My parents were a brave bunch. They decided to make a second child when their firstborn was already 13. Of course, they didn't bother to tell me about that beforehand. One day, Mom just touched her belly in a very special way and told me that soon I'd have a brother. I was so glad to hear that. At the moment, the whole idea of getting a younger brother seemed really cool to me. Besides, Mom and Dad looked so happy back then. My parents even looked younger. Mom in particular was so beautiful with that bulging belly of her. Dad and I were really protective of her and gave her everything she wanted. But then my brother was born, and we entered the period of endless taking care of the baby fuss. Now my parents looked like two very tired shadows, and the situation grew even more bothersome with each passing day. I helped them as much as I could, but it was quite hard for me as well. One day, I woke up and found myself standing in the middle of the room with my little brother in my arms, singing a lullaby to him. It was the middle of the night, and it felt horrible. My brother's teething, stomach cramps, his first steps, and his first word. I experienced it all. Sometimes it seemed to me that he was actually my child, because I was always somewhere near him. Still, I enjoyed helping Mom take care of the baby. And the kid himself was so cute, joyful, always smiling. I played with him and read him fairy tales. But then Mark slowly became the center of my family's attention. Once, for example, I came home at the end of the semester with a report card full of A's and A+. I even got a special certificate of appreciation. Yet no one even congratulated me. Mark just told Mom and Dad a simple poem that I helped him memorize the day before. And they, together with other relatives, showered him with praise. No one paid any attention to me. I felt like I was nothing. Then I noticed that Mom and Dad simply stopped caring about me. I could stay at the school's library till dark and come home late at night and nobody even cared. Yet when Mark scratched his knee on the playground, my parents called the ambulance. And such things happened all the time. It started out small, but soon, Mom and Dad just somehow forgot about me altogether. They even forgot about my birthday of all things. Dad just kissed me on the cheek and went to work. But Mom had no time to do even that. She drove Mark to some workshop, and then the two of them went to a theme park as a reward for his successes. Of course, there were no gifts and no cake. I wasn't Mark. I wasn't important. But in a month, Mom and Dad threw a grand celebration. You see, it was Mark's 3rd birthday, and that date became our family's greatest holiday of the year. That really showed the difference between him and me. My parents thought only about Mark. They concentrated on his well-being and paid no attention at all to any achievements of mine. I became an honor roll student, was awarded some actual grants for my history project, and even won a trip abroad. Yet at home, I got reprimanded for not helping Mom enough with Mark. Frankly speaking, I didn't even want to see him anymore. I felt like he had stolen everything from me. Of course, that was a stupid thought. Mark was a totally sweet child. It wasn't his fault that our parents decided to neglect me. Yet, I couldn't stand it anymore. When I turned 17, I left home forever. I didn't enter the university I was dreaming about since childhood. Instead, I went to a nearby college because they allowed high school graduates to enter and granted me a dorm room. I just wanted to leave my former home as soon as possible. Now I live in a dorm, study a lot, earn my own living, and work towards being the very best once again. But now for my own sake. I don't actually communicate with Mom and Dad, except sending them some greeting cards and occasional gifts for Mark. Mom sent me several letters where she chided me for leaving the family and offered for me to return. Yet, I won't return to those who never cared about me.
Hi, I'm Karen, Angela's mom. I really want my daughter to just come back to the family, to come home, but I'm afraid it's already too late. Yet, I still hold out for hope that she'll understand my point of view. Once upon a time, I thought I had a perfect family. Unfortunately, this turned out to be just an illusion. It's really hard to admit that I might have been the one that destroyed my perfect little family all by myself. My husband and I have a loving and wonderful marriage, a rarity these days. We met as teenagers and have never separated. Soon, we're even going to celebrate 20 years of marriage, a big anniversary. When we were only teens, my husband courted me in such romantic ways. There were kisses in the moonlight, dancing, starry nights spent together, all that sort of stuff. And once, during a date, we looked at the stars together, and I made a wish on a shooting star. I wished to always be as happy as we were in that moment. For a long time, I thought that my wish had come true, even more so when we had little Angela. She grew up as a funny, smart, and soft kid. My husband and I loved her, and still do love her, so very much. She was our little ray of sunshine, the center of our lives. And of course, we really tried to ensure that our little sunshine was always smiling. We got so lucky. Angela appeared to be calm and collected even as a baby. She actually learned how to read before she could even properly speak. Somehow she always knew the difference between right and wrong, and she never hesitated to ask about things she didn't understand. I remember looking at all the other children, spoiled and capricious, and I realized that my Angela never made any fuss. Even when she was teething, she didn't cry or moan. My daughter just concentrated on gnawing at that toy, and that was it. And since her very first days, she was always trying to think before acting. Come to think of it, we never had any problems with Angela before. She was the epitome of a perfect child. My husband and I really wanted to have more children just like her, and we were trying to conceive another baby since our firstborn was 4. Yet, we ended up having numerous setbacks. Doctors told us that we were too old and not healthy enough. Such rubbish. We were only 25 years old each and both felt perfectly fine. I always had time for all the chores and did everything just fine. And my husband was just as energetic and enthusiastic. Yet we still had no luck with the second child. Despite the doctors being skeptical, we kept trying to conceive another baby. And at the same time, we really enjoyed raising our clever and beautiful daughter. She was excellent at her studies, never asked for anything, and always helped me around the house. Although no one demanded anything of her, Angela really wrapped her head around the idea that you had to repay anything good that happens to you with equal acts of kindness. Still, when it was just the chores, I wasn't actually troubled by her beliefs. And then there came Mark. Our son was an unexpected gift, a literal godsend. We'd almost lost hope, and then I felt him inside my belly. I was quite afraid that Angela might become jealous. Their age difference was really significant, and she got used to being the only child. Yet, at first, everything, just like normal, was perfect. Both my daughter and my husband really pampered me when I was pregnant. Sometimes I even had to remind them that I was pregnant, not ill or something. But still, their attention felt so nice. In the evenings, Angela used to sit nearby and read fairy tales and sing lullabies to my belly, and it was just so sweet. I was sure that my husband and I got so very lucky. It seemed to us that Angela was already bonding with her unborn brother. You know, if my parents brought me a baby brother when I was her age, I'd be furious and throw a hissy fit. But Angela was just a wonderful big sister. She started caring for Mark all by herself. I didn't even have to ask her anything. She played with him, changed his diapers, bottle fed him, and all of that by her own accord. Of course, I did the majority of chores, but I knew I could rely on Angela. And that's when I made a crucial mistake. You see, when you care for a small child, you often lose the sense of time. Day after day, month after month, and somehow Mark became my main focus. I forgot everything about everyone else, and that proved to be my own undoing. Of course, I love both of them, yet Angela was a teenager. Have you ever tried to explain something to a resentful teen girl? I didn't even get the problem at first. I couldn't believe that my Angela really felt jealous. But then she left, and it broke my heart. Only then did I understand what a bad mother I became. I proved unable to show my eldest child that I loved both of them equally. Well, I still hope that I get another chance to do so one day soon.
So who's really to blame here? Tell us your opinion in the comments. Leave some likes, share the vid with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you next time.